Welcome on in. This is the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Today, we are going to teach you how to identify the best type of late round and handcuff running backs. Important episode, folks, especially as draft season is heating up. Let's start the show. Welcome on in. This is the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, John McKechnie. That is Mario Puig. Today, we are going to be digging into some theory, some examples as to the best ways to identify your late round running backs, the ones that are viable, the ones that you can just leave aside for the other donkeys in your league to draft. But before we get into that, Mario, one of the more viral clips of this week was obviously Buffalo Bills rookie Keon Coleman. The video was not overly flattering to him, I would say. It was the video of him signing his contract with the Bills, and he's going back and forth, I believe, with the GM or maybe the team president, and he's like, do you want me to sign this like it's an autograph, or do you want me to like sign my name? And everyone was like, this guy doesn't even know how to do his signature. And I say, I stand with Keon Coleman in this. I sign my checks at, say, like a restaurant or a bar or a given establishment in a far different way than I signed legal documents. Or if I were to be signing a contract with life-changing money, I'd probably have a bit more of a different approach to it than just my 50th football that I'm signing and just going whoosh off to the next one. So I stand with Keon Coleman. Where are you with this?
I didn't really look into it until you told me before the show, and I don't know. I didn't even think about it that much as you just did. I assumed he was asking, "Do you want me to write my name out like in print or sign it?" Which I also think is a reasonable question, especially if you ever sign like a lease or something. They're like, "Okay, now write just your initials in regular letters here for the next 70 lines, and then sign these two, and then write your name regular underneath that." It's like they oftentimes when you're signing different things, they'll have you clarify. So, yeah, I didn't care. And certainly if anyone was like bashing Coleman for it, they're just an idiot.
Yes, if you were in the dunking line for that, tisk to you, because I'm sure that everyone that's listening has signed things slightly differently, or maybe I'm just a bozo. Who knows? But also in Buffalo, we'll kind of like start the show here. Now that training camp is getting into full swing, maybe a couple things that have come across our respective radars that have stood out in one way or the other for fantasy circles. This is the prime time for being media literate and in football media literate. I mean specifically, and how difficult it can be to sort of read the tea leaves, or how easily you can be led to, I don't know, one kind of group of wrong think about something just because of the way that someone analyzes a writer's article, that type of thing. And I tweeted about this earlier, and I saw you tweeting about it as well. So staying in Buffalo with Dalton Kincaid as the kind of primary focus here. There is a note from Joe Buscaglia, who writes for The Athletic, covers the Bills, does a good job, noting that there was, a decent amount of Dawson Knox on the field along with Dalton Kincaid when the starters were running in practice that early on this week. And he notes that, a lot of the time when Dawson Knox was back in the fold last year, the Kincaid snap count was, capped a little bit, or his target share was capped a little bit. I don't want to mischaracterize too much, but I think that just Knox's presence doesn't necessarily, and we're not even the biggest Dalton Kincaid guys, but the idea that Dawson Knox is hanging around, like, that doesn't scare me off of Kincaid necessarily. Did you make anything of this?
Right. I thought this one was a really blurry take to even take in initially. I was just kind of having trouble telling if Buscaglia was saying like Kincaid is off the field in favor of Knox at some points, or merely like they are both on the field, yes, but did you notice last year when they were both on the field something about Kincaid's production? And if it's the second thing, That one is simple. That's a big I don't care, because that's just it's a small sample that we're drawing from. You know, the snaps from last year for which Kincaid and Knox were both on the field, and the Bills had a wholly different set of goals at the time. Like, they weren't trying to do in November of last year what they've been planning to do, you know, this season without Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis since April or whatever. Like, they're in a totally different budgeting environment than they were back then. So if we're saying like, oh, they're both on the field, but that's not enough, we need just Kincaid and we need Knox on the bench, maybe that's better for the Bills offense, but I don't think it's true. And I don't think it's going to prove true about Kincaid. If the Bills have them both on the field all the time, they still have to throw it to Kincaid. Doesn't matter.
They do. And this take isn't exactly rocket surgery by any means, but you know, you look at last year, you notice that Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis combined for about 45% of the Bills' targets. Neither of them are on the Bills right now, and you know they're replacing them with Curtis Samuel and Keon Coleman. Again, shout out Keon Coleman, but those guys aren't just going to take 45% combined between the two of them. I wouldn't think, and therefore, you know, Kincaid didn't have like the perfect rookie season by any means, but like he is the one that's left over that has probably the best rapport with Josh Allen. As far as I'm concerned, maybe Khalil Shakir will prove me wrong, or these newcomers as the season goes on. But I think the offense just inherently has to change and to just kind of like 1-to-1, it's going to be the same as last year as long as Dawson Knox is healthy. I think that's misguided.
Also, I would guess that the times that Kincaid and Knox were on the field at the same time was incidentally, that was probably largely drawn from the first half of the year, which is not only just when Kincaid is going to be at his worst in the sample in general, it's also when they were using him the wrong way and a little differently than they were in the later half of the year. Like, they were using Kincaid only on these like 4-yard curls and outs for some reason, sort of the way the Jags use Evan Ingram or something. Terrible idea in both cases. Kincaid used properly is more like a seam threat, the way he was at Utah. And I think Joe Brady got that going more as the year went along. So, yeah, I am personally, like you said, we're not huge Kincaid heads or something, but and I am actually worried about the Bills' passing game in general this year. I'm not so sure it's fair to hold it to the standards of the past 4 seasons, but I would not worry about Kincaid, especially not over this report.
No, definitely not. So Dawson Knox wasn't scaring you the rest of the summer, should not scare you now, you know. But moving on, and this kind of ties in nicely with our topic of the day. So we'll start in Denver. I know we've talked about the Denver backfield recently, but again, this ties into the idea of, you know, correctly gleaning the right things from training camp reports. And people were sounding the alarms that Javonte Williams is a, you know, candidate to be cut, or, you know, have his job taken, lose out to Audric Estime, this type of thing. Well, that seems to have evaporated fully, would you say?
Well, it was just one day, but Sean Payton stood up over the podium and specifically said, I asked Javonte Williams to lose some weight from last year, and he showed up at that weight today, and he looked great, et cetera, et cetera. So only praise. People describing him as explosive, you know, a contrast to last year and stuff, whatever. I think he would have proven a contrast to last year just on the basis of his knee being more recovered than last year. But if he did lose weight that he was trying to play with last year, first of all, why would they? That terrible advice, terrible management by the team or whatever to have Javonte Williams pack on another 10 or 12 pounds last year as he's trying to come back from the knee repair. But if he was heavier yet last year, if he was like 220, 225, that actually to me is an explanation for how Javonte Williams could look worse than he otherwise should, because he ran a 4.57 on the North Carolina Pro Day track at 212 pounds, I think it was, coming out of North Carolina. And that was part of why I was always screaming at the time, John, about people comparing him to Nick Chubb. It was always insane. Nick Chubb ran a 4.52 combine 40 at 227. That's 15 pounds difference, and he's about a tenth of a second faster in the 40. Like the tools, that the whole, like the ammo, the physical overall athletic ammo they're working with is entirely different categories. And so you bulk up Williams like Chubb, like they might have done last year. Yeah, that's going to slow him down. He doesn't have the wheels to do it. He doesn't have the firepower to do it. So going back down to 210 or something like that, which is probably what Javonte played at North Carolina at, that will make him look more like he did at North Carolina. And if this is all happening, if he is more that weight now, and if his knee is recovered, then he's just, like we all thought all along, pretty easily their best running back, and it's not even close. Now, it's still reasonable to pull the alarms about, oh no, he still plays for the Broncos. And, the Broncos, they rotate the running backs a lot. They are going to rotate McLaughlin on the field, and they are going to give Pirine, if they don't cut or trade Pirine, they're going to put him on the field for passing down snaps. So those sub-package reps, if they go away from Williams, that's pressing the margins further yet. But pulling the alarm about Estime and Pirine are going to beat him out. It's like, you just got to. I won't say you have to block whoever said that, but maybe you should. Maybe
you could mute him at the very least. See how it feels. The little soft block, but. Either way, that kind of like just again goes into, what we're trying to unpack today, which is, how to identify your targets in the late round when it comes to running backs. So, guys that are not first on the depth chart, guys that are going, outside the top 100 picks, and, likely later we'll get pretty far along into it. And like that is part of the, reason here why we're breaking this down. Like when it comes to the Broncos and Jaleel McLaughlin and like the hype train that was building for him, it coming into training camp, you have to understand that there's like just sheer straight up volume limitations when it comes to a guy with that frame. Like he's not one of those guys that can scale up into like that huge, like 45, 50 snap type of workload. So, I mean, let's kind of like set the record straight, get some like definitions out there of what we're going to talk about. So in my mind, when it comes to breaking down these late round running backs, handcuff running backs, like the contrast to the starter, I think it is an important thing to remember. Like, does this guy's skill set overlap completely with the starter, and therefore like probably needs the injury to get on the field or have like a fantasy relevant role? Or does he, is he the yin to the yang? Like, is he the Ray Davis to James Cook type of example, where Cook's not going to be that every down rusher, but Ray Davis can provide that, even though Ray Davis not going to be like a huge factor in the passing game like Cook is. So like for McLaughlin, in an example, like he's fine if you're realistic with what the role could look like, but getting Javonte out of the way doesn't necessarily like clear the runway for a guy like McLaughlin to be this like, Arian Foster-esque, found gold.
Yeah, and also just as a general rule, anytime people talk about an obscure breakout running back profile from a Shanahan team or a Shanahan coaching tree team, probably ignore that. I mean, there's a good chance even Arian Foster wouldn't have had nearly as much success if he hadn't been on a Kubiak team at the Texans' peak. Moreover, but yeah, different teams have different goals, different plans with their offense, and then how they're planning to budget those offenses. But each team in each case has a certain amount of backfield reps to give out and a certain amount of function, be it usage from scrimmage or blocking or whatever else. They all will have a certain sum of tasks and usage that need to be budgeted. And different running backs, depending on their traits, can take on different amounts of work in general, different amounts of specific situational work, depending on their skill set and, the kinds of things they can withstand physically. And generally, if you look at these backfields around the league, you can kind of figure out where most of them are heading or have a pretty good idea. Yes, there's some, coach quote sifting to do, but in the long sample, the long run, there's just tasks that need to be done and players that are going to be asked to do it. And in some cases, such as the suggestion that Jaleel McLaughlin maybe play 40 snaps a game, we have reason to say that won't happen for physical limitation reasons. I think it could also not happen for skill set limitation reasons. Not that I don't like McLaughlin. I think he's a really good threat from scrimmage. I think he's proven that. He's a really good player at Youngstown State also. But if you look at how he was used last year, there's only a certain few categories of play types that he's actually used on. And they spam all of those play types in those categories toward McLaughlin when he's on the field. But that's not the same as saying either that specific few tasks that they're spamming, that they can just spam it any number of more times as they want up to any given number, especially while maintaining the efficiency. And it's also not to say that you're going to be able to expect that player to take on whatever other tasks there might be laying around. So in other words, Jaleel McLaughlin, he's on draws, he's on tosses, he's on screen passes. Basically, every time he's on the field, they're designing a space-based kind of touch for him to get. And those plays don't include play designs that are power running of almost any sort, especially not like halfback dive stuff. Not much two tight end, not much with a fullback. It's pretty much just stuff you do when you're playing hurry up offense, which was also when they would often put him on the field. So, you'll see some people reach for a comparison like Darren Sproles. And while it's true that it's true that McLaughlin took on a big workload at Youngstown State and was very productive with it, he did not take on a workload that Darren Sproles took on at Kansas State. And that makes sense because they are built differently. It might look like they're the same build or something, but they're not. One guy being an inch shorter or 2 inches shorter than the other and 10 or 15 pounds heavier is actually a huge difference, especially when you're talking these very short heights to begin with. So right. At about 5'8" or 5'9", 192 or 185, McLaughlin can probably be something like a 30, 25 snap player, but he has not done any power run concepts. He has not pass blocked. I don't know if he's picked up a blitz even one time yet. That's how specifically designed his usage was last year. So yeah, there's the physical limitation that I think we can posit there. And also, we have no evidence of McLaughlin being able to run the actual play types that you would need to be able to run to be on the field for 30-plus snaps in an NFL game. No NFL team runs an offense that's just all draws, all screens, all tosses. So if you need to run a play that isn't one of those plays, and you can't use McLaughlin, then there's a hard cap on the usage he can take on.
So in your mind then, when it comes to like that probably, McLaughlin's case, like a really high touch per snap type of ratio, is there like a level or a threshold at which like it kind of sounds that red flag to you? It's like, okay, he's on the field and like there's very much like a tell, and that sort of actually like works against him in your mind for fantasy going off of that, are there any guys who do have that, okay, it's obvious what this guy's going to do when he's on the field, but it doesn't matter what he does, whatever trait it might be, the speed, the power, whatever it is good enough to where it's like, I don't care that he's a one-trick pony. The one trick is awesome.
Well, for fantasy purposes, it would just come down to the price that they're going at ADP wise. And there's always a certain point where, fantasy production relative to ADP expense, if it's favorable, yeah, go on ahead. I personally hate the idea of specialists at the running back position outside of situations where if the defense is calling like nickel or dime no matter what anyway, because it's that kind of hurry up sort of situation. It's like, yeah, okay, go put in a hurry up specialist. But part of why I actually like feature backs and guys like Josh Jacobs, you can't tell what the play call is based on him being on the field. And it is a concern for a player's efficiency at a certain point if the defense is, if they know like McLaughlin's getting a draw or a toss or a screen, and that's kind of tipping the pitches a little, and the returns get lower and lower as the exposure goes up. That is something that some players are at risk of, but it would require, I think, like big changes from what we're currently projecting them to be drafted at. It's like, I would worry about Austin Eckler breaking down in Washington if they tried to give him a target like every 2 snaps or something. I'd be like, that sounds like it might be a little too much exposure for him. But we're not projecting Austin Eckler to get 120 targets this year, right? So it's something that's I don't think it's like actionable to worry so much about what could go wrong if the usages change. And as far as what any player will do, in the meantime, it's like we have the examples of them having already played, so we don't really need to speculate too much. Generally, running backs won't change that much in terms of like per snap from scrimmage production. There's some exceptions, but especially if they're in a significant sample and have produced a certain way, they're generally going to keep doing stuff like that within, the fluctuation that comes with matchups and, schedule difficulty and offensive line health quality, stuff like that.
Right. Yeah, that is a good point on running backs. Like once you get that first significant sample of snaps like that, there's less developmental nature to the running back position once you get up to this level. That's a good point. Again, barring significant role changes and things like that. If you don't mind, I think we need to get a message in from our friends over at Circa. The biggest pro football contests in Vegas are back. Circa Survivor and Circa Million are now up to $16 million in guaranteed prizes. 2 ways to win and no rake. Circa Survivor contestants select one team each week with no point spread. Last the longest to win it all with $10 million guaranteed. In Circa Million, make 5 picks against the spread each week for your share of $6 million guaranteed quarterly and full season payouts. Looking forward to helping out our guy Nick Whalen with his Circa Million picks this year once the season gets rolling. Enter Nevada, play from anywhere. Visit circasports.com for details. We also have a message from our friends over at Blue Wire. And if you are joining us on the live stream, we didn't have to go very far for that. Those we will add in later for our podcast listeners. Anywho, going back to our running back identification process, we are getting some clamoring in the chat. For Blake Corum, and I think he's like a nice example when it comes to finding these favorable traits for late round running backs. And he not only has that 3-down skill set, but also I think when you look at a situation in which there's like some starter fragility, I think that really, helps a guy like Corum's case, where the starter is getting drafted in say like the first 5 rounds or so, but you're not exactly sold that they're great. And, we don't even need to know if Corum is great just yet because the ADP is what it is. But I think that there's a lot of signifiers within his prospect profile that would lead you to believe like this guy can pretty much do everything that you would need out of an NFL running back. And in Kyren Williams' case, he's good when he's healthy, but he breaks down very, very quickly. So I would just much rather take a guy like Corum where he goes in like the 10th round versus a Kyren Williams in the late 3rd.
Yeah, I mean, we're all in the choir on this one, I think. I agree with that, definitely. But as far as looking at Blake Corum as a case study and even Kyren Williams, it is a good opportunity to kind of look at what goes into, how backfields distribute their usage and what running backs can take what and how much they can do with it. So Kyren Williams, even for what he did last year, even if he got hurt, it's still an incredibly productive season for him in a way that I think is a clear outlier, and it's one owed to the system or the quality of the offensive line, the interior blocking specifically. The basic method for Kyren Williams in the Rams backfield, and this is very unique. This is not something that would translate to almost any other team, in my opinion. I'm skeptical that it'll even last as an enduring premise for this team. But Kyren Williams was basically just kind of hiding behind the 3 big interior linemen and kind of just staying behind them until the last second and then just sort of diving in a direction for another yard or 2. And he'd get 4 or 5 yards over and over and over and over and just it'd pile up with 20 carries, 25 carries, be these big numbers. And the Rams with Matt Stafford and McVay running things, they score points. So there were touchdowns in there too. And if the system is that easy to play in, then in that particular system, you might have somehow created something where a 5'8", 192-pound running back who runs a 4.7 can produce at the level that Kyren Williams did last year. but again, that's not the case on almost any other team. And if it is the case for this team, then the properties, the conditions that made Kyren Williams the exception that he was would just as easily apply to Corum. And that's helpful for Corum because he has some questions as a prospect, basically the same questions as Kyren Williams, but just to a lesser degree. At 5'8", 205, Corum is both small and with a 4.53 40, not fast. And if you have a small running back, like we saw in the extreme examples of Devon Achane and Keaton Mitchell last year, ideally they would be really, really fast at least. And in the case of Williams and Corum, neither of them is fast, and neither of them is neither of them is even average size for an NFL running back. However, the 4.7 in the case of Kyren Williams is still a big contrast from the 4.53 in Corum's case. And in the case of their production, I think you can find, not just in the weight, but in the production in college, I think you can find evidence that Corum can probably withstand a bigger workload than Kyren Williams, just because Kyren Williams took on a lighter workload in college and did a lot less with it too, mind you, than Corum did. So it may well be the case that it could be true that Kyren Williams can produce for the Rams again, like he did last year. But even if it is true, it's likely also true that Corum can do at least as much. And there's plenty of evidence laying around that he might be able to do more. So that's also a good opportunity to point out, like, you don't want to, whatever either of these guys do, you don't want to go applying their samples and like the premises of the logic of the Rams offense. You can't just go and export it into any other offense. It's not like if the Cowboys draft a 5'9", 192-pound running back who runs a 4.7 next year, you can't just be like, this is Kyren Williams. It's a very specific environment that this is occurring in.
Right, exactly. The petri dish of SoFi Stadium. There's also a growing thought in my head, mostly or all due to our YouTube live listeners. I don't see any mention of Jawar Jordan other than our chat during this show. Do you have any thoughts on him? I mean, like, I suppose you could, use Joe Mixon as that like fragile starter example. If you're completely out on Joe Mixon, how do you spec the rest of that Texans backfield? And like, would, say that you were completely fading Joe Mixon, and I, for one, am not, and I'm completely sunk if he's a bust this year. How would you, go about identifying, handicapping like the traits between Dameon Pierce and Jawar Jordan and how it might work out in best ball?
Jordan, I think, is kind of limited in terms of the volume that he can withstand. I think that is probably true physically, and it might be true in the skill set sense. Like he plays tough and everything. He doesn't run quite as light as you would expect him to, given 5'10", 193. But it's a case, I think, of even if Jordan has something going for him, it's all in the skill set compartment. It's not the tool set at all. Like, he at 5'10", 193 ran a 4.56, which is slightly below average speed on a wide receiver like kind of frame, to be honest. So this guy may very well have just tons of just innate instinctual ability of how to run with a football and read an offensive line and how to pace his strides and how to deceive people into taking the wrong pursuit angles, all that stuff. It might be true. It still generally is the case that when you have tools that grade this bad, your skill set can't take you any higher than something like running back 3 on a depth chart. Maybe running back 2, depending on what happens with Dameon Pierce and whatever else the Texans might do. But I think they see Jordan more likely as a guy who can probably only scale up to 25, maybe 30 snaps in a game. But you'll get a max motor rep out of him every time. And on draw plays, especially screens, stuff like that, guys like Jordan, between their motor and their burst, and if it's like a changeup from the starter ahead of them, which it is in Mixon's case, sometimes the defense will struggle to calibrate to them and sort of just let them, slip past. So I think that's the kind of utility that the Texans have in mind for Jordan. And I think if Mixon were to miss time, Jordan's role would not scale up that much. Like if Jordan's playing 15 snaps a game and Mixon's playing 45, then if Mixon's out, I think Jordan's only playing 20, 25, and just a bunch of other guys are getting rotated in for just mini specialists in each case. Like bring in the power guy, it's 3rd and 1. Bring in whatever the guy who's fast because the power guy is slow and he's our fullback or something. Like that's the kind of way that I see it splitting up if Mixon's not available. But I also think that the Texans are a candidate to not only maybe trade Pierce for like a 7th rounder or something, but I bet they'll be looking around for the final cuts because it's just easy to do better than the guys that they have on the depth chart, to be honest.
Yeah, none of those. I mean, Dameon Pierce kind of liked coming out of college, and he obviously had the solid rookie year in what was an otherwise terrible offense, but pretty much disappears in favor of Devin Singletary last year. They bring in Joe Mixon. Yeah, I'm not holding out a ton of optimism. And then I think you bring up a good point that the RB2 on Houston's roster week 1 might not be there right now because between Pierce, Jordan, and even what's left of Cam Akers, like I don't know if Houston feels great about that back.
Yeah. Did you see the DeMeco Ryans quote on that? I was surprised. I thought he would be much like more warm and complimentary, but he was just like, "Yeah, he's here. We'll see if he can compete." Talking about Cam Akers.
Oh,
jeez, sounds like you almost don't think he can. Wow. Anyway,
let's see. Let's move on to another subject matter within the running back sphere. But before that, we do have a couple more messages. We got a message from our friend over at ACME Real Fantasy Football. What's the fantasy football scores looking like an NBA All-Star game? Let's get real with ACME Real Fantasy Football. The top pro teams average around 28 points a game. This is how ACME Real Fantasy Sports scoring system is based. The system is also very accurate compared to the actual game score. Each team drafts only 9 players filling the primary positions. Benches are only used for injured and bye-week players. This leaves 200 free agents available to improve your team. Weekly waivers give preference to the bottom of the standings. League rankings are always changing and keeping it competitive for the entire season. ACME Real Fantasy Football also has a one-of-a-kind playoff format selecting a new lineup each week. All teams are competing from week 1 through the Super Bowl. 12-team leagues start at only $120. Go to acmerealfantasyfootball.com and sign up today. Also got a message from our buds over at Fantrax. Is there something you wish your fantasy league had or features that are missing from your current leagues? Bonus scoring, custom schedules or playoffs, deeper team settings? Well, look no further because we have you covered with our friends over at Fantrax. Fantrax is the most customizable platform in the industry, offering the greatest experience for your dynasty, keeper, redraft, and best ball leagues. Fantrax even offers college fantasy football leagues, and I can attest to the customizability of that. You can have a college league over there with just Conference USA and SEC if you want. You can get real weird with it, and Fantrax can make it happen. Create or join a fantasy football commissioner league. Invite your friends and dominate your draft this season. Fantrax is the top dynasty fantasy football platform in the industry. Are you coming from another service? Not a problem. Fantrax can easily import any of your current leagues and rosters. Ever have a trade go wrong or make a mistake in dropping a player? Fantrax commissioner tools allow you to undo any move with one simple click. Fantrax is running a special promotion you don't want to miss. Sign up for free at fantrax.com/RotoWire today to enter for your chance to win tickets to any regular season NFL game for you and your entire league. Plus, $6,000 in spending cash. That's right, tickets for your entire league. Simply create a new league or bring over your existing leagues for more chances to win. Simply go to fantrax.com/RotoWire and sign up today. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports. All right, Mario, moving onward. So we were just talking about some, starter situations where we don't necessarily, or in some cases we do like that RB1 on the depth chart, but we're a little bit more interested in what lays beneath on the depth chart, but what else kind of like stands out to you when you're identifying your later round running backs?
Yeah, so as much as we want the perfect, high volume handcuff replacement, the kind of really game changing, like high volume, high efficiency sort of handcuff in the later rounds that to give us a big upside play if the starter were to get hurt or miss time for whatever reason. There's nothing wrong either at certain prices of taking a guy who gives you a little floor and not much ceiling. So even if they can't scale up to that 3-down replacement, there's some guys that'll still be useful in their specialist roles if they're efficient enough. And I think you could say someone like McLaughlin is that kind of player. Like he's going too high in my opinion, so that's why I'm not drafting him. But it's never been because I was like, oh, I gotta get a 30 carry upside kind of running back here, or else I just don't even care. I just won't draft one. It's like, hey, McLaughlin can give you probably like some 10 to 15 point games here and there when it's the next guy on your bench gives you a 3 or a 4, and that makes a difference sometimes. But when I'm looking for the kind of later round picks who can actually scale up and ideally I would get them at a cheap price, and one guy who I do quite a bit is Ray Davis, because he's on this team. I don't really like the way the rest of the offense is headed with the Bills, but James Cook, I just happen to believe, has already had a career year. I don't think he gets to 900 yards rushing this season. I don't think any team like Dallas is going to just abandon the run defense over and over and over to get him over 160 again or whatever that was. But also, even if I'm wrong about that, I think Davis can kind of just get his foot in the door as a not power specialist exactly, but a short yardage type specialist. Ray Davis is interesting in a contrast to Cook, because with Davis, I think you can easily project big usage volume from scrimmage, and both as a runner and a pass catcher. Whereas in Cook's case, I'm definitely sold on him as a pass catcher. I never even meant to, question that Cook would be a good off the bench passing game specialist kind of player. That's not worth a second round pick to me, though, especially if I think a guy like in the 4th round, like Davis, might be able to become the preferred interior runner even this year. It just makes a lot of sense. It's something that Cook has never done, including last year. They just sort of didn't do it. And if they absolutely had to, they'd put in Latavius Murray, Damian Harris for a brief time. So it's not just the history, though. It's not just Ray Davis's history of doing it all the time, getting just maximum volume all the time. Even though the defenses in almost each case in college were just like, hey, they're giving it to Davis, go ignore everything else, tackle him. He still got up over and over after going into the teeth of the defense. Whereas James Cook at 5'11", 190 has never done it. And Ray Davis at 5'8", 211 has done it all the time. And you might look at Davis. Some people might look at Davis and assume like, oh, he's the weak, small one because he's 5'8". The other one is tall and strong at 5'11". No, it's the opposite. At 5'11", 190, James Cook is several magnitudes less dense than Ray Davis at 5'8", 211. I mean, you're talking 20 pounds difference on a guy who's 3 inches shorter. That's huge. That's a totally different category of, anchor and power upside. So it's not so much power, I guess, in Davis's case. I mean, he still is short, and 211 is not exactly burly, but he has that fire hydrant kind of build where he can withstand more usage between the tackles and in small fields and in high contact situations, because he doesn't take a hit the same way James Cook does. James Cook, if you give him halfback dives all game, he's going to get clotheslined at some point. He's too upright and skinny. Whereas Davis, he's strapped to the ground, so he can kind of like Devin Singletary, the way he takes 330 carries every year at Florida Atlantic. It's not because he's so strong at 5'7", 205. It's that when he gets hit, these huge, strong people just sort of slide off of him like water off of a duck or something. And it's what allows a guy that's otherwise, yes, small and, not heavy, to just keep getting up over and over from these tasks that would fell a lot of other people.
Yeah, I think that, looking at the density of these players is definitely like an important factor. We preach that during the pre-draft process and during the combine and everything like that. Like, if a player has X height, X weight, like sometimes it's a non-starter. Sometimes it's things that make a given player interesting. And I think another example of that, you could argue, and this is more of like just a straight up unsettled backfield. But how do you handicap Kamani Vidal? I know you're a fan, but how do you?
I love all the
foresee him?
Chargers.
I know, right?
Nobody
So like,
running backs.
how do you draft them all at cost? I mean, I've kind of been doing that, save for Gus Edwards. I have over 20% share in my best ball portfolio of both Dobbins and Vidal.
It's a difficult situation, I think, because I view all of Edwards, Dobbins, and Vidal, however they say it, as capable, certainly from scrimmage. In the case of Vidal, you have the reason to believe he can take on volume too, because he did it at Troy, and because at 5'8", 213 or whatever, he also has that kind of fire hydrant kind of dynamic going on. So oddly enough, it's the 6th round guy that has the highest volume upside of these three players, even though Edwards is the starter, and even though Dobbins, in my opinion, is a top 10 talent at running back if he's healthy. But we don't know what kind of physical state Dobbins is coming back from the Achilles tear. I happen to think he'll be much more advanced in his recovery than most people will be coming back from that, but it's still a huge injury, and he was already, coming back from that multi-ligament. The knee injury from before that sounded like a career ender almost. So we don't know what's going on with Dobbins exactly. And in Edwards' case, I think we know what's going on. It's like he's going to start. He's going to get the power carries. He's going to get 12 to 15 carries every week that he's active, but rarely more than that. And he's never going to catch passes. So I've actually preferred Edwards the most of in terms of who I'm drafting in best ball, because A, it's on underdog where the half point PPR doesn't sting that much with Edwards, and B, I would be getting him in like the I want to say like 12th round or something like that. And if he gets hurt, it's best ball, so who cares? But I didn't take Dobbins that much because I usually had taken a 5th running back already, and I don't want Dobbins any higher on my depth chart than 5. And Vidal, I hadn't taken a whole lot because he's always he's the second most expensive of the three, well ahead of Dobbins. And I understand why. It's because Vidal has the volume upside and Dobbins doesn't. But Dobbins will play ahead of Vidal if he's healthy. So I actually just don't have that much of the Chargers backfield, and what I do have, it's mostly Edwards.
And then, maybe I have it wrong. We'll see. Obviously,
well, no, it's just it could go a lot. There's more uncertainty in that backfield than probably any other, and it's more like I don't end up being a potential buyer at the applicable time in each case, and it's just like, I'm not getting that much. I'm getting DJ Chark and Josh Palmer and Justin Herbert from that offense.
Exactly. But gotten a little bit in the chart game lately.
What could go wrong?
That's found money in the 18th round. Trey Benson.
John, we could get to Benson in a second too. Someone in the chat asked about Tyrone Tracy, and I think Tyrone Tracy is probably in that same category as McLaughlin, where he's not going to be a starter in my opinion this year, but if Tracy does push aside Eric Gray and gets the passing down snaps that Devin Singletary doesn't, then Tracy could be in that like McLaughlin category where even if he's not starting, even if he's only getting 20-25 snaps, he might give you some useful weeks driven by the pass catching production probably. But I don't see him as personally, I don't see Tracy as a likely starter, and I don't think Singletary is at any risk of losing his rushing workload. I think it's just a settled matter that he's going to get it, health permitting. On to Trey Benson, John. Sorry.
So Benson is like an interesting case. I just like the Cardinals offense this year. I like the way it's priced. I like the upside potential there. I do have a ton of James Conner, so by default I don't have a ton of Trey Benson necessarily, but in drafts where and this is like a different conversation than what we've been having because Benson goes a decent bit higher than a lot of the guys we've been talking about, but at the same time, like I think as far as that ability to scale up, I think Benson has that. And, for as much as I'm in on Connor this year, like I, have to acknowledge the past injury concerns and, how that can apply to this year. So Benson, top 3 running back talent in this class, maybe top 2. And we're just one James Conner sprained ankle away from him, like really asserting himself. I worry that if Connor is healthy for most of the season, like the redundancy factor will kind of keep Benson from hitting value. But I still think he's a worthwhile draft piece if you don't get James Conner, because you're getting access to a Cardinals offense. And again, you're looking at a guy like Connor who, does have that lengthy injury history.
Yeah, I think when you're taking a handcuff pick like Trey Benson, you're doing it on the assumption that it's a lottery ticket that probably won't hit. But in the event that it does, you understand that it has the upside to really, kind of flip the whole game upside down. And I think in the case of Benson, you're not going to get that standalone value, but it's still reasonable to take him because, yeah, Connor has missed time in literally every NFL season. And when you watch him run, it's not that confusing as to why. It's like he just goes in head first every single time, the middle of the defense, every single time, just over and over and over, never stops doing it. And you're going to take more hits doing that. There's a literally heavier physical toll to taking that much contact. So if he misses time in Trey Benson's case, I think we have reason to think that Benson will be a high upside, replacement, because he should be in a pretty good offense. And Benson, like you said, there's a lot of indications of standout talent in his case. There's definitely standout big playability in his case. And I think all we're waiting to see with Benson as an NFL player is the degree to which he can fill out the rest of his game, because he wasn't used in that many ways by the Florida State offense. Even though Trey Benson has a frame that conventionally can withstand volume, he hasn't been tested with volume to this point. Maybe it's just because Florida State understandably was concerned about the knee injury at Oregon. It's possible though that there's a chance. There's a whole category of running back that has sort of it's capable of withstanding more volume, but it just hasn't been tested on it yet. And it doesn't mean for sure that because a guy hasn't taken on volume yet that he can't. But or especially in a case like Benson's, where you look at the anecdotes around it, and it's like, oh yeah, there are these things, these various things stopping it from happening. Jordan Travis runs a lot, whatever. So if Benson turns out to be able to withstand more volume than he did at Florida State, and he provides that explosiveness that we almost certainly know is there, yeah, that to me seems like a totally high upside lottery ticket. And it's one of those things, like maybe it's not the likeliest outcome, but if the conditions do come to exist such that the narrow possibility comes forth, he'll go nuts, because he's this big fast guy who runs away from people all the time. And if he gets a lot of usage, multiply volume by that efficiency, you're going to get a big number.
Yeah, I think so as well. I'm excited about Benson in the long run, and kind of a lot of the elements that you were discussing there. Just briefly tying this off, like it's not a rookie, but it kind of applies to Zamir White. Like he never topped 160 carries in any of his college seasons, and now we know that he's going to get the volume. So I'm very interested to see what he's able to do with that. But Raiders offense obviously a lot different, unfortunately, than the Cardinals. Not looking quite as rosy. But that's going to wrap it up for us here on this edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Please like and subscribe over on the RotoWire YouTube channel and onto our RotoWire Football YouTube channel as well. Big thanks to our sponsors over at ACME Real Fantasy Football, over at Circa. Great time at Circa last week, and over at Fantrax as well. For Mario Puig, I'm John McKechnie. Thanks for listening.